Hello, everyone. Hello, and welcome to Exit Ready, the Big Picture, today's digital event. I'm Ben Wright, Chief Innovation Officer at Melo, and I will be your host for today. I am thrilled to be joined by Mel Holman, founder of Compliance and Trading Solutions, most commonly known as CATS, and our very own Vicky Hicks, CEO at Melo.
Morning, Ben.
Good morning, good morning.
Hey, Mel, how you doing?
Yeah, well, not so
Now-
bad. Sun's out. All right.
It's an important fact that everybody exits. This isn't a choice. It will happen at some point in one way or another. Yet few financial planning firm owners have spent much time thinking about their exit until very close to when they want to actually press on and get things done. Yet decisions made years away can massively impact exit value and buyer interest. So today we want to run through the full journey split into three key stages. Number one, preparing the business for sale. Number two, running the deal. And lastly, number three, transitioning post-sale, paying particular attention to compliance and data as we go. We'll also share some honest insight into where firms tend to struggle, what good looks like, and when things go well, and where problems can occur. Our goal is to help you be better prepared for your exit whenever that may be. Now, this session does qualify for structured CPD, and therefore I will quickly pop up on stage our learning objectives so you can see them as we go through. We are recording today's session, so if you do have any questions as we go through, please do drop them in the chat and I'll make sure that they are answered. Here are our learning objectives. That's us. And now here are our learning objectives. There you go. So yeah, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat and we'll answer them as we go. If we can't get to all of them, we will compile the answers and send them out afterwards. With all that said, let's get into the topic of the day. And Vicky, I would like, if that's okay, to come to you to start with, to answer a key question that I've heard several times now. If I'm not planning to exit soon, why should I care about this now?
Well, if you don't know where you're going, it's a little bit hard to get there, is what I would say, Ben, to sort of summarise it all up in one line. But we're really trying to encourage business owners to see exit as a whole phase in their business life cycle rather than just a transaction. And so the earlier you start to get your head around the fact that you are building something to ultimately exit, be that to your internal team or on the open market, the better you can start to make key decisions so that they're not just aligned with kind of the business you're building today, but also the future value that you're trying to create as well. So as always, when it comes to exit, time is your friend or your enemy. And the earlier you start to look at your business through the eyes of a buyer, the earlier you can start to make improvements to your value.
Vicky, can I just pause you there for a sec? Mel, would you mind just muting your mic? We're getting a bit of echo while Vicky's talking. Thank you.
I have nothing else to say there.
That's it. You have nothing else to say.
I'm done. See you later, guys.
Presentation done. Well, we put a few ideas together that we'd like to kind of walk through today, I suppose. So if I just move on to our next slide, which talks around preparing a business for sale. And one of the key challenges that, or one of the key problems, I think it's fair to say that we see when we get approached by sellers, is that they have decided that now's the time to go. They've had a great weekend with their family. It's been wonderful. They've been out in the park, walking the dog. They come back to work on Monday. It's a horrific day. And then on Tuesday, they get a phone call from someone saying, I'd like to buy your business. And then off they go on that process. So there's a lot of the time potential sellers aren't prepared and they're not thinking about this years out. So we want to try and give you the inside track onto what you should be doing to get your business sale ready. So Vic, do you want to start us off with, well, in fact, it's probably actually, Mel, best to come to you really to talk about compliance, maybe to start off with.
Okay, so when a buyer is looking at the firm, they want to see what governance structure is in place, and because it's a really you'll have to undergo a due diligence, as we know. And the quality of the firm and the governance and the procedures and the process you've got in place, and you can demonstrate and evidence that everybody's following those procedures and it's leading to good consumer outcomes, means that not only are you meeting the FCA requirements now, but as a buyer, it tells so much. It tells about how seriously you take your job, and that you're not just churning and just gathering clients. You care about your clients. It helps demonstrate about culture of the firm. And so the better you can start preparing and building compliance as just doing good business, the quicker and the earlier you do that in your business, the better it's going to be. Because then when it comes to the due diligence, it should be quite easy and quite straightforward kind of thing. So when we're always doing due diligence, we'll always be asking, what compliance support have you had in place, or do you have in place? And what we'll be looking at is, do you actually listen to your compliance support, whether that's in-house or external? If you have any external or internal compliance reports, is it actually reviewed by the senior management team? Do you actually follow through on any action points? The FCA are really hot on, if you pay to have an audit done and then just ignore it, what's the point of it? And they will pull you up on that. So regardless of whether you're looking to sell or not, right here and now, the FCA expects you to take the compliance seriously and not a tick box exercise. I think that comes down to the culture part. If you're treating compliance as tick box, then that's not a good feel. And I believe, Vicky, you'll say a lot more, that sellers are truly looking at how the business operates, not just the tick box exercise. It counts for a lot.
Yeah, you're right, Mel. And we're really trying to encourage business owners to work hand in glove with compliance, because we obviously work a lot in the due diligence space. And no matter how well prepared business is, the due diligence process and the complexity and the depth of it always surprises people. But actually, if you've worked in an environment where you've got a very good relationship with compliance, you're used to check and challenge, you're taking the feedback, you're incorporating it into your business, and ultimately you can arrive at the point of the exit process essentially within a full audit history for a buyer. Like, it just makes such a difference. And I think one of the mistakes that we see people making, so the majority of firms that come to us and ask us to support them with their sale, they've already had some experience with M&A. So it's usually that they've been approached by somebody directly, they've had a couple of chats already, and then they've got a bit stuck and they don't really know what to do. And one of the first things I have to say to them, with respect, is you've kind of done things the wrong way around here, guys. And when you get into the actual exit process, which we're going to talk about shortly, it's really important for everybody to maintain momentum and for you to have everything accessible to get the deal done. But before you go to market, this is your time. And you can breathe and you can pause. And this is why I said earlier on, we want to encourage more business owners to look at this prep stage before they go to market. So absolutely compliance, and having taken the feedback that's been provided and incorporated that into your business, it's going to make the due diligence process a lot easier if you've had that external party checking your homework, because potentially then the buyers could rely on some of that work that's already been done by your compliance company. So ticking the compliance box is important. But the next one on the list here is so important, which is data. And I could count on one hand the number of firms that I've seen who have good quality data that tells them, and ultimately the buyer, what they need to know about the kind of underlying asset that's been acquired. And Mel, I'm right in saying, aren't I, that the regulator has kind of laid things out and gone, we're data led now as a regulator, and therefore our expectation is that the firms that we are regulating have incredibly good, high quality, consistent data that can be relied on.
Absolutely. I mean, Consumer Duty has really pushed that through. So in order for you to demonstrate you're meeting the Consumer Duty outcomes, you have to be gathering data. And more importantly, what you're doing with that data. So it needs to be data that's relevant to the firm. And are you properly reviewing what that data is telling you, both good and poor. You know, if it's good, then awesome. What we're doing to maintain that great data. If it's, you know, poor, or, you know, we can room for improvement, what we're doing with that. And that is absolutely an FCA expectation. That should be in people's firms' consumer duty annual reports. And the FCA have said absolutely that they are a data-driven regulator. Hence the reason why they're doing so much around restructuring some of the reports. Although it's a pain in the backside, don't get me wrong, doing quarterly returns and reg data returns and everything. You know, they're fine-tuning that in the background. And the Consumer Duty Alliance have got a great, they've got some great resource there, and they issued a newsletter last month around, and they provide some tools around gathering data. So Consumer Duty Alliance, well worth a visit to their website if you want, you know, a bit more of an idea, I suppose, of what you're gathering, if it's correct.
I think as well, what data allows business owners to do is to uncover the untapped opportunity within their business. So we've got a phrase which is, to understand your data is to understand the opportunity. And ultimately you can distill down into just two things in terms of what buyers are looking at when they're looking at making a purchase. They're looking at risk and they're looking at opportunity. And if you can showcase a low risk opportunity for a buyer, one where you've had incredible governance and a real strong understanding of your business, but you've also showing them through the data, look, these are the areas where if we had more resource, more time, more capacity, we could generate additional revenues. That's really where you start to be able to push the boundaries in terms of offers that are made and show to a buyer that they're not just buying a business that looks like this today, but actually in their ownership, they could take the business from where it is today to where it has the potential to go.
I think on that data front as well, the speed at which you can come back with data says a lot about the business itself as a structure. So if you get a request for data, or somebody asks you a question about the data within your business, and it takes you 3 weeks to come back with that answer, that's going to say a lot about how you actually run the business and can impact how a potential buyer will see that or view that business. Because if you can't understand the metrics, the data that runs behind that, then is it a good buy in the first place, or will it be a lot of work for them to tidy things up once they kind of take it over?
Yeah, and buyers as well are becoming a lot more discerning. There's going to be a lot of opportunity that's going to come to market. They're going to be a lot more choosy over the opportunities that they go with. And the cost to integrate is a very high cost for purchase. So if they're looking at a business with, you know, tidy data, good compliance, good governance, whilst that firm's not going to be an exact match for theirs, right? The actual integration process to bring the two together is going to be quicker, more streamlined and more cost effective. And so the concern as we kind of move forward for anybody that's going to be coming to market in the future is, how do they make sure that if a buyer has a whole load of options that they can look at, why are they going to look at yours? And they're going to look at yours because it's well packaged, you've made it easy, you're showing them that you've got your finger on the pulse in terms of risk, and you're demonstrating to them that opportunity that they can untap.
We've just had a question, or maybe a statement rather than a question, from the lovely Jane Hodges, who said, how can firms not have decent MI if they use a CRM system?
Jane.
It's a good challenge, Jane. But what we see frequently is that a lot of firms will use a CRM system plus a load of spreadsheets, or the CRM system isn't very well maintained in terms of record accuracy. So there's lots of potentially duplicates. There's missing data out of there. They sometimes use multiple systems for kind of income recs, so the income doesn't match the client profiles. There's a range of stuff on there. It should be straightforward, but not always the way.
We often see, often is a strong word, but when you've got a large team, if you don't have consistency of approach in terms of labelling, for example, and having the correct folders, data scattered all over the place. So that means that your MI reports that you run off in the back office systems come out incorrect. And then if you're sending up that data to a potential buyer, that could be misleading. I mean, it could be a world of problem, let alone for the regulator kind of thing. But we see that as a common error.
Yeah, we do as well. And I think I could speak to two businesses that are both using IO, and one business will say to me, I hate IO. right? And they're basically using it as an address book. And then I can talk to the next firm and they power their entire business through IO. They do the income reconciliation. They track everything that's going out to clients. They use the portal. They use it for review purposes. So it really is with back office systems and CRMs, I think, as much as you want to use them. But sometimes it comes down to capability. And maybe the people who own the business aren't the people that are right to kind of be managing the data. And if you're a block in your own business because your skill set, your unique abilities are over here doing strategy or dealing with clients, then you've either got to look into the firm and say, is there somebody internally that can sort of run this data project, or look externally. And what we're sort of reassuringly seeing now are more business owners investing into the operation. I think for a long time, business owners have seen the clients as the business, and it's really admirable, you know, that client outcomes are kind of at the fore. And typically, even if I see a business that's an operational disaster, they still do have like good client outcomes at the heart of what they're doing. But there's becoming more of a recognition now that the business itself is its own living, breathing entity, and it needs that constant investment into the operation. And so if you're buying licenses from somebody like Intelligent Office, for example, probably the missing piece between having the licenses and embedding them into your business might actually be that you need a firm to support you in setting it all up properly, building out your workflows on there, making sure that it's going to do what you want. Otherwise, it does just become a very expensive address book.
Thank you both, and thank you, Jane, for the point there that you raised. Mel, let's talk annual reviews for a second when it comes round to exit, because we again see a variety of completeness of annual reviews, I would say. Most firms are doing a good job with their clients, but maybe record keeping's not what it should be. What's your take on that?
So when we do due diligence for potential buyers, they are absolutely requesting us to do a deep dive into the evidence of how the firm has delivered what they said they're going to deliver. If a client is paying a fee for an ongoing annual review, are they actually delivering that? And if not, why not? And that's where you have to have the data to back that up. So, example, I've got a firm at the moment where they're relying upon their individual advisors to track that they're doing the annual reviews rather than at a firm level. So what I'm trying to say to them, look, you need to be in control of this. Whilst the advisor is responsible for doing the annual reviews, you need to have oversight and make sure it is actually being delivered. I've got a few firms like that. Anyway, annual reviews, the client is paying a service, and so you have to deliver that and track that. I know we've got a slight distraction, should we say, CP 2610 saying that annual reviews, you don't have to do any annual reviews anymore. That's not quite what the CP paper is saying, just to be clear, but I know that there has been some various FCA speeches that perhaps the language is suggesting otherwise. This is very much a consultation paper at the moment. This is not set in stone. I believe that the FCA's intent is around that they recognise that there may be some client sets where they don't need to have an annual review. Maybe it's the children of clients, for example, and therefore there could be a separate service offering rather than a blanket. You don't have to do annual reviews anymore, and you can still charge your clients a fee. Let's be clear. From a due diligence point of view at the moment, absolutely, if your client agreement, if your proposition says you have to do you're delivering an annual review, whether it's face-to-face, online or whatever, you have to demonstrate you are delivering against it, because we are seeing absolutely more and more complaints, not around the original advice anymore, but about lack of service. And there's an absolute massive uptake in this. And the FCA, adding on to this, is obviously talking about value. So you still need to, from a consumer duty point of view, have to be demonstrating you're providing value to your clients for that fee that's being paid. Yeah, I can go on about that forever, Ben, so I'll leave it at that.
I'll ask you a couple of questions, Mel, what kind of specific ones, because we like to try and get some practical advice out on it. So in terms of the annual review itself, is somebody in their agreement has put that the service is a face-to-face review every 12 months? is that what has to be delivered? Or if they revert to Teams or phone calls, does that make an impact on things?
So if you're saying that it's going to be a physical meeting, then you have to offer that. Now, the client may say, I don't want to have a face-to-face meeting for whatever reason, I'd have it by Teams. That's absolutely fine. But what we're looking at is, if the proposition is saying this, are you trying to deliver against that? Navigating your way around the client circumstances and what their needs are, really. If the client drives that, then fine. You don't have to insist that they come to the office. Face to face, you could articulate that in your client agreement as face to face means face to face physically or via Teams, Zoom,
Yeah, I was just thinking it might be useful if people are thinking about updating their client agreements at any point, just make sure that what is in there is easy to deliver, or you're not going to come up against a blocker that you can't actually deliver what you've promised in that agreement.
Also, on that note, Ben, sorry, whilst you're talking about client agreements, privacy notices, we would recommend that if you haven't already, make sure in your privacy notice it makes reference that in the event that you were looking to merge or sell to another third party, that they will have access to client data, but it'll be limited. Something along those lines. I can put some text in the chat there. But if you're thinking about this journey now, I would definitely suggest you update your privacy notice along those lines.
That's a great shout, Mel. If you could give us some wording, we're happy to ping that out afterwards to everybody so they can think about their client agreements. And just a last question on annual reviews before we kind of move on from there. When we talk about having good records of what's been done, what exactly needs to be documented? Is it offer day, actual day, the date documentation went out, what was signed? What's kind of the minimum that someone would need to have in place to clearly show that they have delivered the service?
So you need to be, I would suggest, confirming when you contacted or had the audit trail when you contacted the client, but you need to have the date of when the review was actually done. And then, so you don't need to track about when the report was sent out, unless you want to, because you've got your own service level standards, for example. But what we're looking for is, this is when the meeting was due, and this is when it was actually done. So, and maybe the meetings, a few weeks after the due date, but as long as we can see why that was after the due date, and more often than not, it's client driven, then that is fine. But the data we should be able to drill down to that data to say this is why it was late, and rather than was it a firm issue or is it a client issue? If it's a firm issue, is it because the advisor hasn't got enough resource to keep on top of it? Has it got too many clients, for example? Are they lazy? Are they not keeping track of it? Why aren't we delivering the service that we should be delivering? And that's what the data should be telling you.
Thank you, Mel. Appreciate that. So, Vic, financials.
Yes.
So financials are pretty key to any deal because that's the upside that someone's looking at buying. What are some of the common challenges you see around firms and their financials?
Not being able to go into the level of granularity that we could really do with. So when it comes to financials, we don't just want to track turnover. We want to break it down into different types of turnover so that we understand initial fees versus ongoing fees. That plays massively into the ultimate value that a business will achieve, because typically higher multiples are aligned to more recurrent income that generally is persistent and stays. So understanding what is recurring, what is one-off is really important, but then also any mortgage business that you might do, protection business that you might do, employee benefits. So we've just got that real clarity around where the different sort of verticals of money are coming into the business. It would also be really great to understand if you're running a business that has different departments. So say you have a wealth department, a mortgage department, and an employee benefits department. Actually, are you tracking financially how those departments are working together with one another? So, for example, internal leads, because that's going to be really powerful when you're showing your financial position and that future opportunity to a buyer, because you're going to be able to show the buyer in that scenario that what they're acquiring is a business that's also capable of internally generating referrals and continuing to grow. The other thing you want to know around your financials as well is how the financials are linked to the individual advisors, so that you can look at each fee earner kind of as their own little mini profit center. You can make sure then that from a capacity perspective, they're getting the right kind of support that they need within the firm in terms of administration and paraplanning support. But it's also that ability to demonstrate to a buyer when you ultimately sell that you're going on this growth trajectory and actually you have X amount of surplus capacity within the business that's going to be able to maintain that cost base to ultimately capture that uptick in turnover. Of course, there always comes a point where you've got to bring in more resource, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's part of growing a business. But if you can demonstrate through your financials any additional capacity that's available, then ultimately that all flows through to profitability and future profits.
I like to think of it a little bit like the TV show Dragon's Den. So when you're kind of going into this kind of environment, and you're talking to potential buyers, there is an expectation for you to understand your business. And one thing they'll be keen to talk about and understand is how it runs, how it functions, and the numbers that go along with it. And it really is a challenge, where you start conversations saying you've got 200 million AUM, and then when it comes to due diligence, actually you double counted somewhere and you've only got 170, and it just kind of throws the whole perspective, and there's a bit of trust almost lost at that stage, because it is expected that you understand this stuff. So I would say before you start any conversations, do your homework first. Make sure you understand all the stuff in the background before you engage with buyers, because that is a real challenge we've got in our profession, is that most people end up selling directly from inbound contact. As I said before, they'll have had an off day, they'll get a phone call saying, I'd like to buy your business, and then things kind of push on from there. They haven't prepared, they haven't got ready, they haven't got all their ducks in a row, and it just makes the whole transaction, it puts you as a seller on the back foot a little bit. So I would think if you can prepare first, it makes such a difference.
I'm just going to do it, just a weenie push, but it's the reason why our exit process starts with our exit readiness assessment, because in that part of the process, like, we'll take a look at essentially the business's ability to successfully go through due diligence. So better for you as an owner, right, to take control of that part of the process, look at your firm through the eyes of an acquirer, assess any gaps and make those improvements in your business before somebody else does. So we would look at sort of regulation and compliance, and then if there are gaps, either we dovetail in with our existing compliance firm and they will fix those gaps, or they might want a different compliance firm. So we might be speaking then somebody like Mel and her team at CATS, and again, working with the seller to fill in those gaps. We also do a data assessment, which is really powerful, because straight away then you can see, where are there missing postcodes? Where are there missing dates of birth? Are we holding the data at a household level? Have we got the right fees next to them? Have we got them allocated to the right advisors? So we run that data assessment. And something we've not really touched on here, but is really important when you're preparing for exit, is not just that the business is ready, but that you're personally ready as well for what's going to happen. And that's being personally ready for the transition itself and the sort of M&A journey, because it's tough. You're going to be scrutinized. You're going to have a spotlight shone on you. So that in itself is a psychological journey that you've got to go through, and you've got to be kind of eyes open to. But then what is life like for you post-sale? And if you enter the market with that clarity, not just around your business, but the clarity around what you want as well for yourself, that makes the conversation so much more meaningful. Because a sale doesn't necessarily need to mean an exit. In some scenarios, people are selling to hand over to retire, or to hand over and go and do something else. But in a lot of cases, people are selling and then remaining as an advisor moving forwards, or remaining in a leadership position as kind of part of the new firm. So in those scenarios, you've got to look at it from two aspects: one, the business, and one, yourself personally as well. And yeah, if you've got some clarity around what you want to do and what great looks like for you and your business, it's really going to help when you move into the exit process.
Really good points, Vic. Thank you for bringing that up. Being personally ready is a massive thing. I'm conscious of our time today, so just before we move on to onto the next section, Mel, defined benefit advice or previous defined benefit advice. There are a number of firms who have done some firms who have done lots. We tend to find that there is a buyer for everybody, but potentially if you've got a lot of advice in this area, it could mean there are less interested buyers because of the risk involved. Is now a good time to kind of go back on that advice and maybe look at a past business review to kind of square things off?
Well, quite possibly. It could be. Just you would need to liaise with your PI, because obviously they need to be mindful of what may be unearthing. But now it could be if you identify any unsuitable cases, what with annuity rates increasing, interest rates gone up, etc. Now it could be that there's no loss, for example. So then you've done that review of the DB advice, contacted the client, told them we've done an assessment, but there's no loss, done and dusted. That is a judgment call, I would say. You've got to be mindful that when any due diligence happens, if you've done DB, they will be looking at that DB advice. Absolutely. I believe it's softened a bit. I think people are a bit more approachable about it now. But you need to understand the level of scrutiny. So I would, as a minimum, I would suggest start using the DBAT form that the FCA published on the FCA website, so you can do it in-house if you wanted to. There's a guidance document to help you complete that DBAT form, and then that will help you to work out, we're confident, you as a firm, I think we're confident that we're giving suitable advice, absolutely. But you've got to be thinking as a third party who doesn't know the client, is relying wholly on what's on the client file. To do those sense checks will then at least give you an idea of where the gaps may be and get ahead of the situation. It may be that you want to do some random ones first. Perhaps you look at your higher CTVs. Definitely look at, unfortunately, if you've done any DB transfer advice where the client's under 55 at the time of transfer, the chances are it's automatically about unsuitable, because that's just kind of like rightly or wrongly, that's how the FCA sees it. But that's where you need to gather that data. A lot of firms in this area would have done this already, because they're already tracking for various FCA returns, DB, FCA thematic reviews and things like that. So they'll have a good handle, or should have a good handle, about where their client base lies. Should they be doing all-out review of the DB stuff? Yeah, that's a judgment call. I would say speak to your PI, but it's something that you should be considering.
Some of the buyers actually do, Ben. Some of the buyers will, as part of their process, actually review the DB. So do more than just diligence the cases, and do a full review essentially on those cases. So we've had that with a couple of buyers, and it's quite nerve-wracking for sellers kind of going through that process. But actually, it draws a line in the sand for everybody, for buyer and seller. And when a seller is selling, they're not just walking away from liability. If they are selling and the liability is kind of attached to them, because they're either, leaving the business behind and selling the assets, so they've still got the business, or maybe they're a sole trader or something like that. It's a lot of liability to kind of carry around. So there can be some sense in certainly some of the buyers' view is, let's just get it cleared out now, get it dealt with, draw a line in the sand, and then everybody kind of knows where they are moving forwards.
Thank you, Vic. It's one of these things where it's worth having a think about, and maybe talking to your compliance support provider about, talking to someone like Melo about how things will be regarded in the marketplace. And as the last bullet point on this slide, timing is everything. Time is either your friend or your enemy. If you start early, you have time, you have options. If actually you decide you want to sell next week, things become a whole lot more challenging, and there's much less you can do to impact the attractiveness of the business and also the ultimate value of it itself.
Yeah. And I think as well, Ben, to kind of prepare early, it's not about having to exit, but it's about giving yourself the option. And in particular, the option if something happens that is unexpected. And we've had to deal with fortunately not many, but a handful of what you'd call sort of distress sale cases. So where there's been death or serious illness. And in those scenarios, you really want to, as sort of the intermediary, to try to retain as much value in there as you can, be that for the family or the next generation, whoever it is that's going to benefit from that. But that's challenging to do unless the business is in a really sort of neat, tidy and transferable state. So being exit ready is about giving yourself option. It's not about having to exit.
And, as we always say, a business that's easy to run is easy to sell. If you get yourself sale ready, you'll probably have a more profitable, easier to run business while you wait to sell eventually, whenever that time may come.
That's
right,
it.
I'm going to move us on to the next part of the process because we spent quite a lot of time talking about preparing. So next, let's, if I can get my clicker working, here we go. Let's talk about the deal itself next. So we have prepared, and now we're going in to actually start having those conversations and trying to find a buyer. Do you want to start us off, Vic, on the importance of building a deal team?
Of course. So the first thing I would say is that when you're coming to sell, it is so important that you continue to focus on your business, do your annual reviews, bring in your new volume of business as you are, ordinarily doing. You cannot use the kind of excuse of, well, because I was dealing with the exit process, certain other things I didn't get around to dealing with, because that actually calls into question, what is it that the buyer is actually buying? Are they buying a business that can work without you, or are they buying a business that's intrinsically linked to you? Because actually you've just told me that your new business fell off a cliff, or you couldn't get around to your servicing because you were dealing with the M&A process. So it does call, certain things into question. So as always, it's like you focus on your unique abilities, focus on your talents, and bring in a team of people who can work and support you to get through the exit process, because it is hard enough to sell a business. To sell a regulated business is like next level. So in terms of who you sort of need on your team, on your exit team, to get you through the process, you probably need somebody that can make introductions to different types of buyers. So we've got, is it over 300, I think, Ben, buyers on the books?
It's about 300 now, yeah.
Now, 300 and some change buyers on the books. Don't get me wrong, some of them I won't give my dinner money to, let alone somebody's business. But there are a lot of good buyer options out there. And I think quite often when people go through either a direct approach or maybe go through an intermediary who, without realizing, only has sort of access to buyers that look like this, you potentially miss out on the right type of buyer that could offer a more aligned outcome for you. So working with somebody that can open up the market and introduce you to a range of different types of buyers is really important. And if they can also negotiate on those deals for you, which will allow you to preserve the relationship you've got with the buyer. If they can project manage the whole piece as well, it's hundreds of hours of work to sell a business. So as much of that as you can remove from you and get on to somebody else, the more effective you can be in driving your business forward and driving the sales. Of course, you need a really good compliance firm alongside you. So they should have been with you for the prep phase, and then hopefully they'll be with you as well through the actual sales process. So if certain things come up, we've got compliance on side to deal with that. If certain scenarios arise during the deal process, again, we've got compliance there that are going to be able to help and support that. So good compliance team is important. Probably the most, obviously I'd say actually we're the most important with the introductions, but second most important when you're actually going through the deal itself is to have a really good lawyer. I had a guy come to me the other day, he'd had an offer through, he said to me, do I need a lawyer? I was like, yes, you do. You need a lawyer, and you need to pay handsomely for said lawyer, because the lawyer must have experience in the buy and sell of financial planning firms. In our world, the way deals are structured, it's not the way that most business sale deals are structured in other kind of sectors and industries and stuff like that. we have such a long tail of liability that actually a lawyer that really understands what you're signing up for in terms of warranties and indemnities that you're going to provide, so promises and insurances to the buyer, the more that they understand that in context of kind of the broader regulated space, the more they're going to be able to dive into those clauses and really protect you from the buyer being able to come to you afterwards and take back some of that money. So that's really important. But the other thing as well in our deals, which doesn't, you know, it isn't the same in a lot of other business sales, is how much of the consideration or the purchase price you don't get on day one. So you might get half of your money, 60% of your money on day one. The rest of it is going to come to you over a year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever it is that you kind of negotiate. And that's usually conditional on something. So like retention of the profit, retention of the ongoing fees. And again, there are so many clauses around the deferred consideration element of a deal, what buyers can do, what sellers have to do, what the downside is on the deal, that with the right lawyer in there protecting you and the right advisor in there negotiating, not just on the headline rate, but on all of these different levers that can be pulled to ultimately protect future payments as well as what's already been received, then, you know, worth the weight in gold, really, is what I would say for a good quality lawyer. And tax advice, sometimes there's little you can do with tax advice when you just start the exit process, when you're ready to exit. You've just got to keep your fingers crossed that you're set up in the right way to benefit from the tax reliefs and things that are available. But again, with more time, if you're not set up to sort of tax optimize your sale, again, you've got the time there to just make changes to your structure so that it works from a tax perspective. Your tax advisors are going to be valuable, not so much on if you kind of leave it too late with tax advisors, they might not be able to make any improvements to your structure, but they're still going to be beneficial when it comes to things like the tax clauses within a purchase agreement or the tax warranties that you're giving as a seller. So again, having everyone in their right seats that can deal with all of the component parts is ultimately going to make a good exit team.
Thanks, Vic. And
Victoria, I've got a question.
Oh, go on now.
So really often, I totally agree, compliance needs to be involved at outset in terms of what the plans are, what the vision is. I think the earlier we know, the better that any compliance support firm can help you on that journey. But I often get told, often strong way, but sometimes we get told, oh, we couldn't tell you because we was under an NDA. But surely under any NDA or heads of terms or whatever, there should be a clause that says that you can, certain parties need to be kept in the loop. Is that a bit of an excuse, or do people misunderstand the nature of an NDA?
I think they misunderstand, because in almost all NDAs that I say, there's also like a capture clause, which is and your agents. So, if you provide this information to your agents, essentially, then they're bound by, the terms of the NDA as well. So, yeah, I think it's probably more that either sellers haven't properly understood it and they've been like, oh, I'm under NDA, I'd better not talk to anybody. Or maybe they don't want to tell people because they, don't want to be told this isn't a good deal or don't go ahead with it. So I think it could be a mixture of the two things, Mel. But yeah, we'd rather you were involved throughout.
There is sometimes that kind of sunk cost thing, isn't it? That you've got so far down the line, you don't want anyone to come in and tell you that you're doing the wrong thing, so you just kind of push on with it. But interestingly, I was talking to a lady a couple of days ago who has exited and it has not gone well. There have been a number of changes that have happened from what she was anticipating was going to go through. So in the initial kind of conversations or the negotiation process, there were a lot of things said but not documented, or the documentation was quite light. So in one particular clause, she was telling me about reasonable endeavours.
Yeah.
And the firm who had bought said, well, we did use reasonable endeavours, but it just didn't work. And there was no There was nothing to say what they should have done, what they shouldn't have done. Was it enough? Were they trying hard enough? There was no kind of real reference around. It was all about integration, where it all started to go a bit wrong.
Yeah.
And views seemed to change, and the documentation just wasn't tight enough so that there was very clear to say who was going to do what, when, and how that was going to work. And I think that particular individual didn't use an FS specific lawyer, so the lawyer never pointed them out as part of the deal, and it has caused some headaches.
Well, we want the integration plan to be part of the purchase agreement, actually, Ben, for that reason. And the FCA now, the consolidation review, like they expect that the integration plan has been agreed ahead of time. And they're not just looking at a business's or a buyer's ability, or a buyer having the money to acquire. They also want to know that they've got the operation and the capacity to be able to properly integrate that business for the outcome, for strong outcomes for consumers and the staff ultimately. So yeah, it's kind of, obviously it's a shame for all the purchases that have already happened, but actually now moving forwards, I would say one of the biggest areas of focus for us when we're working with sellers is helping to build out that integration plan and recognizing that there are some things that a buyer has to do regarding an integration plan in terms of when they want things to happen and their regulatory responsibilities of communicating out with clients. But actually, the sellers, they know their clients best. They know their staff best. They know how they've always communicated. And so we really like the sellers to kind of lead that communication piece and speak in their own tone, in their own words to their clients, and really try to smooth that over.
I suppose part of our negotiation is protecting that tail of deferred consideration, because when the deal's been done, let's say you get 40%, 50% up front, you know that you have that, but the rest of it is still up for grabs. And it's how the businesses integrate together will make a huge difference, difference around that.
And also what the downside on a deal is. Like, we got a load of offers through from a business the other day, and we were sitting and going through them with this business owner, and it was a profit play. Well, for some of the acquirers, they made an offer on the basis of profit, some on recurring income, and some on the basis of total turnover. The difference in downside across them was huge. So we had one deal where if they were down by £1 in the deferred period, they would lose £1.50 for every pound that they were down. We had another deal where they lost £7.75 for every pound they were down. So it doesn't take losing many clients in a scenario like that to actually wipe out those future deferred payments. So that's where we say here, understanding the deal, looking beyond like just the headline rate is so important. It's what is the likelihood that I am going to receive my money in full? And that comes through what is integration going to look like? What are the changes to clients going to look like? More changes, more upheaval, more potential client loss. And how well have we protected those deferred payments through both insulating strategies around what the buyer and the seller should do, but also protection around the buyer being able to bring warranty and indemnity claims.
That's why you need someone in the corner, I suppose.
So I think that leads into when you're doing the due diligence on the buyer. Now, asking the question, how can you demonstrate to me that you can afford to buy me out? So what are your financials?
Yes.
And there's a lot more FCA scrutiny around this area. So you know, I don't think as a seller, you shouldn't be afraid to challenge the potential buyer and ask questions of them. You know, it should be a partnership like you're alluding to. You know, have we got a meeting of the minds? And so you should be confident to ask some of those challenging questions that you need to know for protection of you and your end client.
Absolutely, because clients invest so much more with their advisors than just their assets. You know, when you think about what a client's invested, like it's their hopes and their dreams and their aspirations and their fears. They've cried on you when they've been through the worst times in their life. They've celebrated, you know, the exciting times that are coming up. A change of advisor is a big thing for clients, and getting that right is you know, I feel like we owe them a duty to making sure that we get that right. One of the things actually we've put on there, Ben, is around share versus asset deals. And for anybody that's not aware, it can be a lot less tax efficient to sell the assets of a business, because ultimately it's the business selling the assets. So the money comes into the business, trading receipt, subject to corporation tax, and then you've actually got to get the money out, as opposed to an owner who has a limited company being able to sell the shares, and then it's tax on them personally and it's capital gains tax. So it comes back to the importance of that prep stage, because if as a business owner you've got a limited company and you're hoping that somebody's going to acquire the shares, if that exit readiness piece shows you that you are not in a position to sell your shares, on £1 million sale, that can be the difference of between £200,000 and £250,000, right? Depending on like some bit of tax planning that you can do. The tax difference can be huge. So all of a sudden, like, you're 2, 3, 4 years away from exit. You decide that you're going to invest in checking out your kind of exit readiness. You spot some gaps, you dovetail in with somebody like CATS and Mel's team, and that could be the difference between you being able to sell your shares or having to sell your assets. And you're going to do a 10, 15, 20%, 20 times return on the investment you've just made into, you know, compliance support, for example, if you're able to then sell the shares as opposed to the assets.
It is incredible just how much difference you can make to a valuation by getting small things right and doing a little bit of prep work up front. Now we are smashing through time. There's so much we could talk about in this subject.
So much.
I'd like to run through onto the last part of the deal, and we've probably only got 5 or so minutes today to kind of talk around this, but let's talk about the actual transition itself. And Vicky, you've already talked to us about that integration planning. So making sure you plan upfront before you start exactly what's going to happen during that transitional period. But Mel, do you want to have a chat through from your perspective? What makes a transition go well? What causes challenges?
I'd say there's 2 things. One is culture. We have seen a number of instances where the team may not have been as aware of what's happening behind the scenes, or they're late to the message, and the management team hadn't really quite aligned the cultural differences, or underestimated, you know, that they thought that they're using the same platform, same back office system, so it should be quite a nice match, but they're not fully appreciating the difference in clients and how the servicing of those clients, for example, and the way the 2 firms were approaching clients. And as a result of that, we've seen people leaving the firm. Now, maybe that's a good thing by the buyer, because maybe they want to get rid of some staff, maybe, but actually they're losing some really good quality team that know that client bank. And actually, if they're not careful, they could lose a flurry of clients that may be following the previous advisors, or they're not happy with the service that's been delivered, for example, because it's not what they're used to, and therefore, you know, that value of the company goes down. I can't stress enough about making sure that you've got cultural alignment is such I think could be easily overlooked, but I think it's a real core element of what you should be looking at. The other thing I just want to touch upon, I will put a link into the chat. Please don't be, I'm going ahead of this step, but don't be under the illusion that you can do bulk transfers for clients, like novate everybody across. Your clients, the contract is between the client and the firm. If the client is going to be moved to a different firm, you have to repaper. You have to, even if the fees aren't changing, you have to reissue the new client agreement, privacy notice, and fee agreements, if you have those, letter of engagement for the new firm. You can't just say, oh, everybody's on Transact. Even if Transact allow it, I don't know if they do, but even if the product provider allows you to do bulk switches, that doesn't matter. Just because they can do it does not mean that you are fulfilling your regulatory obligations, and actually you're breaching contract, because the contract's between the client and the firm. It's, you know, if it's pre-RGR, when it's between the firm and the product provider, that's a different issue, but we're long past that now. So I think that people sometimes don't appreciate that, underestimate the scale of this exercise. So coming back to what you previously said about the client communications as well as the team communications is just so important and needs thinking through.
Thank you,
the team communication point. I think a mistake that I often see being made is that the team are treated like characters in the seller's journey, as opposed to actually this is about their own individual futures. They're not just there to support the seller in exiting and to transition the clients across. They want to hear that within this new organization, their own career objectives and ambitions and stuff like that are going to be dealt with. And quite often, as business owners who are selling, an owner makes the decision to not speak to the staff for quite a long time during the process because they want to make sure that they don't kind of want to upset the apple cart in case it doesn't go ahead. So sometimes conversations start very late once a deal is kind of a lot more certain or maybe even secured. But in that scenario, then sometimes your staff can feel a little bit like the rug's been pulled from them all of a sudden. And they start to piece things together around some of the private meetings you had in your diary and the closed doors and stuff like that. And you don't want to create that sense of uncertainty. So when you do communicate it out to your staff, you've got to be really clear in your communication. Maybe if you have had to act a little bit cloak and dagger, like raising that and explaining why, but also hearing from them as quickly as possible what any of their concerns are and getting any of their questions answered. Because sometimes staff feel like, oh, we're so small, like they're doing this great big thing over here, and maybe it's not so important if I can still finish on a Friday early or I can work from home on this day. No, those are vitally important things to those individual staff members. And one of the most important things when staff are communicated with is that any concerns are heard, and as quickly as possible they're dealt with and they're answered, so that they've got that clarity around not just what it means for the whole, but actually what it means for them individually, and that they're important in this. They're not just a piece that's kind of come along with the business.
Really important point, Vic, because if you think about it, you can think about this altruistically, or you can think about it from a mercenary perspective. Altruistically, these people have been with you on the journey, and you want to make sure that they're looked after through and beyond that journey point. But if we look from a selfish perspective, if the transition is not handled well and your advisors leave, and as a result of that clients drop off, then your sale value is going down no matter what.
Yeah.
So it's in everyone's interest to make sure your advisors are well looked after. We have had a question come through, and I'm very conscious of time. Actually, we had a question come through from Andy. Mm-hmm. Andy's asked, is there a minimum sale value required to achieve a share sale rather than an exit sale?
Rather than assets? Yeah. I mean, in the odd scenario, a business of any size can sell its shares, right? And that might be because somebody actually wants to acquire a regulated entity. So there are some scenarios where maybe somebody's an AR and actually acquiring direct authorization gives them an entity from which to start, or maybe there's a new consolidator coming to market and actually they want to buy, a small regulated entity that's nice and clean. It doesn't have, not much has happened within it, and it becomes a real good foundation for them to build on. But, it's hard, like to sort of find buyers that are looking for that sort of thing. It's more challenging. And so different buyers who are kind of on the acquisition journey and have bought a few, they will have a different level on which they would say, we can buy the shares, or we would need to look at an asset sale. And that's because the cost of doing the due diligence on a share purchase as opposed to an asset purchase is night and day. And also the cost for legals as well. You're talking a 5-6 times long document on a share sale as opposed to an asset sale. And of course, there's a cost that's attached to that. So, for some businesses, some acquirers, they might say 75 million upwards, 100 million upwards. For others, they might set it an enterprise value and say, well, an enterprise value sub $1 million, we'd look at asset, and over $1 million, we'd look at share. Of course, for us, if we have a seller that owns a limited company, we will try our hardest to sell their shares because of the tax implications if we don't. But then that's just understanding what levers you can pull with a buyer to try to, you know, work that through as a share sale as opposed to an asset sale.
Thanks, Vicky. And with that, our time for today is up.
That's a small onion.
That's shallot.
That's shallot.
So that brings us to the end of
Mel proud at the end.
Thank you to Vicky and for Mel and for all of you for joining us. If today has raised any questions about where your firm is heading, how to prepare for the exit process, or indeed who to sell to, then please do get in touch. At Melo, we've helped over 100 firms exit well. We work exclusively for you, the seller, and bring together buyers from the whole of the market to try and find the right one for you. Now, if you need some help getting ready, CATS provide due diligence preparation service, as well as compliance support pre and during sale. For those considering their exit and want to know all the details to exit well, we're going to be running a 3-part series where we drill down into the real nuts and bolts of each of those 3 stages. We could have talked for a lot longer today. So if you do want to learn in detail about each of those stages, stay tuned and we will be in touch with how you can come along to those. We'll be sending the recording out from today's session with some follow-up resources and a few of the links that Mel suggested earlier on. And if you can think of anybody else that should have been here but couldn't make it, please do send the link on so they can watch as well. But that's it. Thanks again. Thanks for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Cheers.